Ethan Cole hadn't planned on going back to Millbrook. Not for a wedding, not for a funeral, not for anything. But his mother's knee surgery meant somebody had to drive her to physical therapy 3 times a week, and somebody, apparently, meant him. He told himself it would be fine. 6 weeks, tops. In and out. He was 23 now, not the skinny 17-year-old who used to eat lunch alone in the band room because the cafeteria felt like a minefield. He had a life in the city, an apartment, a job he liked, a version of himself nobody in this town had ever met. He was unpacking his second box when the doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone. His mother was asleep upstairs, worn out from the drive home from the hospital. He wiped his hands on his jeans and opened the door, already composing an apology for whatever solicitor was about to ask him about his lawn. It wasn't a solicitor. It was Julian Reyes. For a full 3 seconds, neither of them said anything. Ethan's brain simply refused to process it, refused to reconcile the boy he remembered, all sharp edges and cruelty dressed up as charisma, with the man standing on his porch now. Julian had filled out. His jaw had squared off, his shoulders had widened, and there was something tired and open in his face that Ethan didn't recognize at all. "You're back," Julian said. Not a question, like he'd been keeping track. "Temporarily," Ethan said, and his voice came out steadier than he felt. "My mom's knee." "Right. I heard." Julian shifted his weight, hands jammed in his jacket pockets, and for a second he looked almost boyish, almost nervous, an expression Ethan had never once seen on him in 4 years of high school. "I live 2 doors down now. Bought the Hendersons' old place last spring." Of course he did. Of course the universe would arrange it so that the person who'd made Ethan's adolescence a slow-motion humiliation was now his literal neighbor. "Great," Ethan said, flat. "Small world." "Ethan, I have boxes to unpack." "Julian." He shut the door. Not slammed. He wasn't 17 anymore, wasn't going to give Julian the satisfaction of a scene. Just shut it, firm and final, and stood there with his back against it, heart going harder than he wanted to admit. Through the door, muffled, Julian said one more thing. "I'm not who I was. I know that doesn't mean anything to you, but I'm sorry. I've been sorry for 6 years." Ethan didn't answer. He listened to footsteps retreat down the porch steps, across the lawn, and away. Then he sat down right there on the hardwood floor, knees to his chest, and stayed like that for a long time. He avoided Julian for 11 days. It wasn't difficult. Millbrook was small, but not so small that 2 grown men couldn't orbit each other without colliding, if one of them was determined enough. Ethan drove his mother to appointments, cooked her dinner, mowed a lawn that hadn't been mowed since spring, and made a careful study of Julian's driveway before he ever backed out of his own. The collision happened at the hardware store, because of course it did. Ethan was standing in the paint aisle, holding 2 nearly identical shades of blue up to the light, like the decision mattered more than it did, when a voice behind him said, "The one on the left has more gray undertone. It'll look better in a north-facing room." He turned. Julian was holding a bag of screws and wearing a soft gray t-shirt that made his eyes look startlingly warm, and Ethan hated that his first thought was that Julian looked good. "You paint now?" Ethan asked, because it was easier than anything else he might have said. "I flip houses. Mostly. It's a whole story." Julian rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I'm not going to corner you in a hardware store. The room. It's a north-facing room, right? For your mom's reading nook, she mentioned it at the pharmacy. You talk to my mom. She talks to everyone. It's not a conspiracy." A small, uncertain smile. "She's kind. She always was." Something in Ethan's chest loosened half an inch, against his will. "The left one," he said, holding up the can. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He bought the paint on the left. He told himself it meant nothing. It kept happening after that, small, unplanned intersections that Ethan couldn't quite manage to prevent no matter how carefully he mapped his days. Julian at the farmer's market on Saturday, showing him which peaches were actually ripe. Julian jogging past at dusk, lifting a hand in a wave Ethan didn't return, then regretted not returning. Julian, one evening, standing in his own driveway with a stalled truck and a look of pure defeat, and Ethan, against every instinct of self-preservation he possessed, walking over to help. "You know your way around an engine?" Julian asked, surprised, as Ethan popped the hood. "I know my way around a battery terminal. Don't get excited." But he found the corrosion in 30 seconds, and Julian laughed. really laughed, head back, delighted, and the sound did something unfair and complicated to Ethan's pulse. "Thank you," Julian said, once the truck turned over. He was standing close, closer than the moment required. The porch light caught the side of his face, and for a second neither of them moved, and the air between them went thick and strange, charged with something Ethan refused to name. "Don't mention it," Ethan said, and stepped back first, and told himself that was a victory. It was another 3 weeks before Julian told him the truth. Really told him, not the doorstep apology Ethan had shut out, but the whole thing, sitting on his own back steps with 2 beers going warm between them while the sky went orange and then violet over the trailing. "My dad," Julian said, staring at the middle distance, "used to tell me that being soft was the same as being weak. That if the guys at school thought for 1 second that I wasn't," he made a vague, bitter gesture, "normal enough, they'd smell it on me. So I made sure nobody could smell anything. I picked someone gentle, and I made him the example. That was you. I'm not going to dress it up as anything other than what it was. I was a coward, and you paid for it." Ethan turned the bottle in his hands. "I used to practice not crying in the boys' bathroom between periods. Did you know that? I got so good at it I didn't feel anything for years. I know. I hate that I know that." Julian's voice cracked slightly. "I've thought about you more than I probably had any right to. Even back then. Especially back then." Ethan looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" Julian met his eyes, and for once didn't look away, didn't perform anything. "It means I was 17 and terrified of what it meant that I couldn't stop looking at you. And I turned that terror into something ugly instead of figuring out what it actually was. It took me years and a lot of therapy to say that sentence out loud." The evening had gone very quiet. Somewhere down the street a sprinkler ticked on and off. Ethan's heart was loud in his own ears. "I don't know what to do with that," he admitted. "You don't have to do anything with it," Julian said. "I just didn't want to keep lying to you by omission. You deserve the whole truth, even the parts that make me look terrible." Ethan didn't sleep that night. He lay in his childhood bedroom, staring at a ceiling he used to know every water stain of, and turned the conversation over and over, looking for the safe interpretation, the one that let him keep his walls up. He couldn't find it. Every version led back to the same place. Julian Reyes, monster of his adolescence, had just told him, carefully, painfully, at real cost to his own pride, that he'd spent years wanting him. And Ethan, God help him, wanted to believe it. He didn't see Julian for 4 days after that. It wasn't strategy this time. It was fear, plain and unglamorous. He busied himself with his mother's care, with unpacking the last boxes, with 3-mile walks that always, somehow, avoided Julian Street. It was his mother who finally called him out on it, over dinner, with the particular bluntness only mothers seem to earn the right to use. "You've been miserable for 4 days," she said. "And it started right around the time you stopped mentioning Julian Reyes' name, which is suspicious, because you'd started mentioning it a lot before that. Mom, I'm just saying, whatever it is, sitting in this kitchen avoiding it isn't going to unhappen it." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You've spent so long protecting yourself, sweetheart. I just want you to be happy, whatever that looks like." He found Julian in his own backyard, sanding down an old dresser by work light. Sawdust caught gold in the beam, sleeves pushed up his forearms. He looked up when Ethan's footsteps crossed the grass, and something in his face went carefully still, like he was bracing for another closed door. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, before he could lose his nerve, "that I don't actually know how to forgive somebody. I've never had to try before. I don't know what it's supposed to feel like." Julian set down the sander. "What does it feel like right now?" "Terrifying," Ethan admitted. "Because I think I don't just forgive you. I think I want you. And that's so much worse." The silence that followed had weight to it, had gravity. Julian crossed the space between them slowly, like Ethan was something that might startle and run, and stopped close enough that Ethan could see the workshop light reflected in his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth coming off him in the cool evening air. "Can I?" Julian started. "Yes," Ethan said, before he'd even finished the question. Julian's hand came up, hesitant, and brushed along Ethan's jaw. Barely a touch, reverent, like he still couldn't quite believe he was allowed. Ethan's breath caught. Every nerve in his body seemed to gather itself toward that single point of contact. "I've wanted to do that for 6 years," Julian said quietly. "Then stop wasting time," Ethan whispered. The kiss, when it came, was slow and careful and utterly unlike the boy Julian used to pretend to be. No performance in it. No armor. Just two people finally putting down everything they'd been carrying. Ethan's hands found the front of Julian's shirt and held on like an anchor. Somewhere above them the first stars were coming out, indifferent and ancient, while 6 years of unfinished business quietly resolved itself in a backyard full of sawdust and porch light. They broke apart, foreheads still touching, both a little unsteady. For the record, Ethan murmured, "This doesn't erase everything." "I know," Julian said. "I'm not asking it to. I just want the chance to be someone worth forgiving. Every day, if you'll let me try." Ethan laughed, a real laugh, the first one he could remember having in this town in years, and pulled him back in. The 6 weeks turned into 8. Then into a decision Ethan hadn't seen coming. An offer to work remotely, a lease he didn't renew in the city, a box of his belongings that never got shipped back out of Millbrook at all. His mother pretended not to be smug about it, and failed completely. Some nights he and Julian sat on that same back porch, the old dresser refinished and gleaming nearby, and talked about everything they'd lost in 6 years apart, and everything, impossibly, they still had time to build. The bully who'd knocked on his door that first evening was gone, had been gone for a long time. Ethan understood now, hiding behind a version of himself that fear had built and love, slowly, had taken apart. "Regret anything?" Julian asked one night, his head resting against Ethan's shoulder, fireflies threading the dark yard. "Only that it took a knee surgery to bring me home," Ethan said. "Everything since has been the easy part." If this story moved you, hit subscribe and drop a like. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like Ethan and Julian's. And let me know in the comments, did you forgive Julian before Ethan did? Because there's more to their story. The wedding, the family who doesn't know yet, the ex who comes back into the picture. And I'm only going to tell it if enough of you ask. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter for 3 days before Ethan worked up the nerve to open it. He recognized the handwriting on the front immediately. Looping, careful, the kind of penmanship someone practices when they want a moment to matter. Ethan Cole guessed. His stomach dropped before he'd even slid a finger under the flap. There was only one person left in his life whose wedding could make his hands go cold like this. Marcus, his older cousin, the one who used to drive him to school when his mother worked early shifts. The one who'd sat with him, 16 years old and shaking, the night Ethan finally told his family the truth about himself. And the one who, 3 months later, had gone quiet at Thanksgiving, and quieter at Christmas, and by the following spring wasn't returning calls at all. Not because he hated Ethan. Ethan had come to understand that much, eventually, through a mutual aunt's careful diplomacy. Marcus simply hadn't known what to do with a truth that big, and instead of learning, he'd disappeared. And now Marcus was getting married, and apparently wanted Ethan there. "You've been holding that same envelope for 10 minutes, Julian said from the doorway, 2 mugs of coffee in hand, hair still damp from the shower. He'd taken to staying over more nights than not lately, in a way that had stopped feeling like a novelty and started feeling like the shape of Ethan's actual life. "It's Marcus," Ethan said. "He's getting married." Julian set the mugs down and came to sit beside him at the table, not pushing, just present, the way he'd learned to be over these past months. "The cousin who ghosted you. The cousin who ghosted me." Ethan turned the invitation over in his hands. "He wants me there. With a +1, apparently. Do you want to go?" It was, Ethan thought, such a Julian question. Not should you go, not are you going, just do you want to? Leaving all the complicated middle ground open for Ethan to actually think through instead of performing a decision for someone else's comfort. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "Part of me wants to stand in that room and make him look at what he walked away from. And part of me just wants to skip it entirely and never think about it again. Neither one of those feels like healing. They both feel like anger wearing a different coat." Julian reached over and laced their fingers together on the table, thumb tracing slow circles over Ethan's knuckles. "For what it's worth, and I recognize I have limited authority on the subject of making amends, I don't think you owe him closure. But if some part of you wants to walk into that room whole, with someone who loves you sitting right beside you, that's not anger. That's just claiming your own story back." Ethan looked at him for a long moment. 6 months ago, the idea of bringing anyone as a +1 to a family event would have been a hypothetical so distant it barely registered. Now it was sitting across the table from him, holding his hand, offering to walk into a room full of people who might not know what to do with either of them. "You'd really come?" Ethan asked quietly. "Try and stop me," Julian said, and the warmth in his voice made something in Ethan's chest unknot for the first time in 3 days. The wedding was 2 states away, which meant a 6-hour drive, which meant 6 hours of highway silence broken up by gas station coffee and Julian's terrible taste in road trip playlists and long stretches where neither of them needed to say anything at all. Somewhere around hour 4, Ethan found himself talking. Really talking, the kind of unguarded rambling he rarely allowed himself, about what it had been like that Thanksgiving after he came out. The specific quality of silence that falls over a table when half the people in the room don't know where to look at you anymore. "Marcus used to be the one person who made me feel normal," Ethan said, watching the fields blur past the window. "And then even he couldn't do it anymore. I think that's what actually broke something in me. Not that people I barely knew treated me differently, but that the person who knew me best treated me like a stranger." Julian's hand found his over the center console, without either of them making a production of it. "For what it's worth, I don't think you were ever the one who was broken in that equation. I know that. Mostly." Ethan managed a small smile. "I'm working on believing it in the parts of me that still flinch." "That's allowed," Julian said simply. "Healing's not a deadline." The venue was a restored barn out past the edge of some small town Ethan had never heard of, string lights threaded through the rafters, the whole place smelling like cut hay and lilies. Ethan spotted his aunt first. She went pale, then recovered, then hugged him tight enough to bruise, whispering, "I'm so glad you," came into his ear in a way that made his throat go thick. Distant cousins offered careful, curious glances at Julian, standing close at Ethan's shoulder in a well-fitted charcoal suit, looking entirely unbothered by the scrutiny, like he'd decided a long time ago that the opinions of strangers weren't worth flinching over. Marcus found them near the gift table, 40 minutes in, looking older than Ethan remembered, the kind of older that comes from years of carrying something unresolved. "You came," Marcus said, and his voice cracked slightly on the second word. "I almost didn't," Ethan said honestly. Marcus nodded, accepting that without argument. His eyes flicked, briefly, uncertainly, to Julian. "And this is Julian," Ethan said, and reached back without looking, finding Julian's hand automatically, like his body had already decided this was a fact worth stating plainly. "My partner." The words sat in the air between the three of them. Ethan watched something shift in his cousin's face. Not rejection, this time, but a kind of visible effort, a man trying, late and imperfectly, to be better than he'd been. "It's good to meet you," Marcus said, and extended his hand to Julian, and Julian shook it without hesitation. "Congratulations," Julian said warmly. "She seems like she makes you very happy." "She does." Marcus's eyes came back to Ethan, and there was something pleading in them now. "Ethan, I know sorry doesn't undo 4 years. I'm not going to pretend it does. But I am sorry. I was a coward, and you deserved better from me, of all people." Ethan felt Julian's thumb move gently against his hand, not pushing him one way or the other, just there, steady, the way he'd learned to be. Ethan thought about his own doorstep, months ago, and the door he'd shut on a similar apology, and how much had changed in him since. "I'm not ready to pretend everything's fine," Ethan said carefully. "But I didn't come here to hold a door shut forever either. Let's just see where this goes." Slowly, something in Marcus's shoulders eased, like a held breath finally released. Slowly, he agreed. "I can do slowly." They danced later, after the toasts, after the cake. An unplanned, unhurried thing under the string lights. Julian's hand warm at the small of Ethan's back, the two of them turning in slow circles while distant cousins pretended not to watch, and, gradually, mostly, stopped pretending and just watched. "You okay?" Julian murmured against his temple. "Better than okay," Ethan said, and meant it. "I used to think coming back here would only ever cost me something. Tonight it feels like it gave something back instead." "That's what happens," Julian said, "when you stop protecting yourself long enough to let people actually see you. Sometimes they surprise you." Ethan pulled back just far enough to look at him properly. The string lights caught gold in his eyes, and for a moment the barn, the music, the murmuring relatives all fell away to background noise. "You surprised me first," Ethan said. "Every single day since that doorstep." "Good," Julian said, and kissed him, unhurried, certain, entirely unbothered by the eyes that might be watching, right there under the lights, in front of a family that was, slowly, imperfectly, learning to make room. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday, cream cardstock with Ethan's cousin's name embossed across the top, and it sat unopened on the kitchen counter for 2 full days before Ethan worked up the nerve to slide it open. Bring a +1, his aunt had scrawled in the margin, underlined twice. He found Julian in the garage, elbow deep in the guts of an old record player he'd been restoring for a month with no visible progress. Sawdust and grease had become a kind of permanent uniform for him lately, and Ethan had stopped pretending he minded. "My cousin's getting married in October," Ethan said, holding up the card like evidence. "My whole family will be there. Grandparents. The aunt who still asks if I've met a nice girl yet." Julian set down his screwdriver slowly. "And you're telling me this because I want you there. As my +1. Not as my neighbor who fixed my mom's porch light." As Ethan's throat tightened around the word, 6 years of caution still living somewhere in his chest, as mine. Julian crossed the garage in 3 strides and kissed him, grease-streaked hands framing his face, and it took a long moment before either of them remembered the invitation was still crumpling gently between them. "Yes," Julian said, when he finally pulled back. "God, yes. Obviously, yes." Nothing about love, Ethan was learning, arrived without its complications. 3 weeks before the wedding, his phone buzzed with a name he hadn't seen in years. Marcus. His college boyfriend. 2 years together, an ending neither of them had handled particularly well. The text was innocuous enough. "Heard you moved back east. Would love to catch up if you're ever in the city." He should have deleted it. He meant to. Instead it sat in his notifications for a full day, a small ember of old feeling he didn't examine too closely, until Julian picked up his phone off the counter, not snooping, just moving it to charge it, and the message was right there on the screen. The conversation that followed wasn't a fight, exactly. It was worse than a fight. It was quiet, careful, the two of them circling something neither wanted to name directly. "I trust you," Julian said finally, sitting across the kitchen table, jaw tight. "I do. I spent years assuming I didn't get to keep good things. That I'd ruin them, or they'd get taken. I know that's not fair to put on you. I'm not going anywhere," Ethan said. "But I need you to believe that eventually, without me having to prove it every time something old resurfaces. I can't spend our whole relationship reassuring the 17-year-old version of you." Julian flinched, and Ethan immediately regretted the sharpness of it, reached across the table for his hand. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, softer. "That was unfair. I know you're working on it." "No," Julian said. "You're right. I can't keep asking you to pay for what my dad did to me. That's my work to do, not yours to manage." He turned Ethan's hand over in his, traced the lines of his palm like he was memorizing them. "I'll go to therapy about it. Actually go, not just say I will. I'd like that. For you, not just for us." They sat like that a long while, hands joined over the table, the record player still in pieces in the garage, the wedding invitation still propped against the sugar bowl, small ordinary objects bearing silent witness to two people choosing, again, to stay. October came gold and sharp-aired. The ceremony was held in a barn strung with fairy lights. Ethan's whole extended family packed into folding chairs, and when Julian walked in beside him in a charcoal suit, hand steady at the small of Ethan's back, there wasn't a single moment of hesitation in it. No flinch, no scanning the room for danger the way the old Julian might have. His aunt did, predictably, ask about a nice girl. Julian answered for him, easy and warm. He's found someone. Took him 6 extra years to notice, but he got there. Ethan laughed so hard he had to excuse himself to the punch table, Julian's hand never once leaving his. During the first dance, watching his cousin turn slow circles under string lights, Ethan felt Julian's chin settle against the top of his head. "I used to think I didn't get a version of this," Julian murmured. "The easy, ordinary, loved version of a life. I thought I'd used it up being cruel." "You didn't use anything up," Ethan said, tipping his face up to look at him. "You just took the long way getting here." "Worth it," Julian said. "Every miserable, cowardly, wasted year of it. Worth it, if it ends here." "It doesn't end here," Ethan said. "It's barely started." Julian smiled. The real one, the one that still, after everything, made Ethan's chest ache in the good way, and kissed him right there on the dance floor, in front of aunts and grandparents and a cousin in white, with absolutely nothing left to hide. They drove home past midnight, windows cracked, the whole sky littered with stars the city never let you see. Julian's hand rested easy on Ethan's knee the entire way, and neither of them felt any particular need to fill the silence. "Move in with me properly," Julian said, out of nowhere, somewhere around the county line. "Not the back and forth. All the way. I want to wake up next to you on the days that are boring, too, not just the good ones." Ethan didn't answer right away, just reached over and laced their fingers together, steady on the wheel, and let the quiet stretch out warm between them until